It is October 1907. The American economy is 48 hours from total collapse. Banks are failing across New York. Crowds are forming outside every branch, desperate to pull their money before it disappears forever. The President of the United States is powerless. The Treasury has no solution. And so, at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, the most powerful bankers in America are escorted into a private library at 219 Madison Avenue, New York. The doors close behind them, and the man who summoned them, a 70-year-old banker with cold gray eyes and an iron will, tells them they are not leaving until America is saved. They will stay locked inside until 4:45 in the morning. His name was John Pierpont Morgan. And this is the night he didn't just save America. This is the night he proved he owned it. To understand what happened in that library, you need to understand who J.P. Morgan was. Not the legend, the man. Born in 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, Morgan came from money, but not the kind of money he intended to die with. His father, Junius Morgan, was a successful banker who had built deep connections with European financial houses, particularly in London. From childhood, J.P. Morgan understood one thing above all else: that the real power in the world didn't belong to politicians or generals. It belonged to the men who controlled capital. By the time he was 30, Morgan had already shown his instincts. During the Civil War, while other young men fought and died in the fields of Virginia, Morgan stayed in New York and made a fortune financing arms deals and currency speculation. It wasn't heroic, but it was instructive. He understood that wars were opportunities, that chaos was a market, that the man who stayed calm while everyone else panicked was the man who ended up owning everything afterward. By the 1880s, Morgan had turned his attention to the railroads, the arteries of American commerce. The railroad industry was destroying itself. Dozens of competing lines were cutting prices, going bankrupt, and taking investors down with them. Morgan saw not a failing industry, but an inefficient one. He began buying failing railroads, restructuring their debt, installing his own men on their boards, and merging them into profitable monopolies. They called it Morganization. The process was simple in theory: acquire, consolidate, eliminate competition, extract profit. In practice, it was the most aggressive corporate takeover strategy America had ever seen. By 1900, J.P. Morgan effectively controlled over 100,000 miles of American railroad, more than the entire rail network of Europe. But railroads were just the beginning. In 1901, Morgan did something no individual had ever done before. He bought Carnegie Steel, the largest steel company in the world, from Andrew Carnegie for $480 million. Then he merged it with every other steel company he could acquire and created US Steel, the first corporation in American history valued at over $1 billion. $1 billion in 1901. J.P. Morgan didn't build companies, he consumed them. And by 1907, his reach extended into banking, steel, railroads, shipping, and electricity. Through his early financing of a young inventor named Thomas Edison and the creation of General Electric. One man, one network, one agenda. Control everything. Here is what made Morgan different from every other powerful man of his era. He didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to be the system. In the late 1800s, America had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no lender of last resort. When financial panics hit, and they hit regularly. In 1873, 1884, 1893, there was no institution to stabilize the economy. There was only chaos. And chaos, Morgan had learned, was expensive for everyone, including him. So he built an informal system of his own, a network of banks, trust companies, and financial relationships so interconnected that Morgan himself functioned as America's de facto central bank. When a company needed financing, it came to Morgan. When a government needed bonds underwritten, it came to Morgan. When the United States Treasury itself ran out of gold in 1895 and faced potential default on its debt, it was J.P. Morgan who personally organized a $65 million gold loan that saved the American government from bankruptcy. Think about that for a moment. A private citizen bailing out the federal government. President Grover Cleveland came to Morgan's office on Wall Street like a man asking for mercy. Morgan gave it, at a price. The price was always the same: influence. Not money, not titles. Influence. By 1907, it was estimated that J.P. Morgan and his associates sat on the boards of 112 corporations with a combined value of over $22 billion, roughly $700 billion in today's money. He wasn't just a banker. He was the invisible government of American capitalism. October 1907. It started, as financial panics often do, with a bad bet. A group of speculators attempted to corner the market on copper stocks. They failed. Their banks, the Knickerbocker Trust Company and the Trust Company of America, were exposed as dangerously over-leveraged. Word spread through New York in hours. By the morning of October 22nd, a line had formed outside the Knickerbocker Trust on Fifth Avenue. By noon, it stretched around the block. By 3 o'clock, the bank had paid out $8 million in withdrawals and was forced to close its doors. The panic spread like fire. Every trust company in New York faced a run. Stock prices collapsed. Call money rates, the overnight lending rate between banks, hit 150%. 150%. The New York Stock Exchange nearly shut down entirely. And then, on the evening of October 23rd, the most powerful men in American finance received a summons. Come to the library, tonight. J.P. Morgan's private library at 219 Madison Avenue was not a room designed for comfort. It was designed for power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, Renaissance paintings, a massive fireplace, and Morgan himself seated at the center of it all, playing solitaire while the American economy burned outside. One by one, they arrived. The presidents of New York's most powerful banks and trust companies, men worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Morgan told them the situation plainly. Several trust companies were hours from failure. If they fell, they would take the stock exchange with them. If the stock exchange fell, the panic would spread to every city in America. The damage would be incalculable. And then Morgan told them something else. He had already determined exactly how much money was needed to stop the panic: $25 million. He had already determined which institutions would receive it, in what order, and under what terms. All he needed from the men in this room was their agreement to fund it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Morgan stood up from his chair. He walked to the center of the room. He placed a document on the table, and he told every man present, "You have 10 minutes to sign, or don't sign." There was silence. Then one man signed, then another, and another. By 4:45 in the morning, every man in that room had committed. $25 million, deployed before the markets opened. The panic stopped. The New York Stock Exchange did not close. America did not collapse. And J.P. Morgan, who had walked into that room as a private citizen, walked out as the most powerful man in the history of American finance. But here is where the story gets truly dark. Because after 1907, a very powerful group of men asked themselves a dangerous question. What happens when J.P. Morgan is gone? The panic had exposed something uncomfortable. The stability of the entire American economy had depended on the judgment and resources of one private individual. That was not a system. That was a gamble. And so, on the night of November 22, 1910, 7 men boarded a private train at a New Jersey railway station. They arrived separately, in secret, carrying only hunting equipment as cover. They traveled under false names. Senator Nelson Aldrich became Mr. Aldrich. Frank Vanderlip of National City Bank became Mr. Orville. Paul Warburg, the most sophisticated banking mind in America, traveled as Mr. Volney. Their destination? Jekyll Island, Georgia, a private resort owned by J.P. Morgan's associates. Their mission? To design America's central banking system in complete secrecy. For 9 days, they worked behind closed doors, debating, arguing, drafting, and redrafting. What they produced was the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System, the central bank of the United States that was formally created by Congress in December 1913. The men who designed the system that controls American monetary policy to this day, the system that determines interest rates, money supply, and the value of every dollar you earn, designed it in secret on a private island under fake names. J.P. Morgan died in March 1913. 9 months before the Federal Reserve opened its doors. Some say the timing was coincidental. Others note that the system created at Jekyll Island bore a striking resemblance to the informal financial network Morgan had spent 40 years building. The names changed. The structure remained. When J.P. Morgan died, his estate was valued at $80 million. John D. Rockefeller, then the richest man in the world, looked at that number and reportedly said, "And to think he wasn't even a rich man." He was right about the money, wrong about everything else. Because what Morgan left behind wasn't wealth, it was architecture. The architecture of American capitalism. The system of corporate mergers, board interlocks, investment banking relationships, and central monetary policy that he had designed piece by piece over 50 years. That system is still running today. J.P. Morgan Chase is the largest bank in the United States as of 2026, holding $3.9 trillion in assets. The Federal Reserve, designed in secret on Jekyll Island, still sets interest rates, controls money supply, and functions as the lender of last resort for the American economy. The corporations Morgan created or financed, General Electric, US Steel, AT&T, shaped the industrial landscape of the 20th century. And the model he pioneered, acquire, consolidate, control, became the operating manual for every major Wall Street firm that followed. Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns. The names changed. The playbook did not. What Morgan understood, what made him the most powerful private citizen in American history, was something very simple. Governments are temporary. Politicians are replaceable. But the man who controls the flow of capital, the man who decides who gets money, on what terms, and at what price, that man outlasts every president, every war, every panic. That man doesn't just participate in the system. That man is the system. The library doors opened at 4:45 in the morning in October 1907. The men filed out into the cold New York air, their signatures on Morgan's document, America temporarily saved. Morgan stayed behind. He sat back down at his table, and he resumed his game of solitaire. Every week on Empire Blood, we go inside the stories behind the systems that run the world. Not the version they teach in school, the real version. If you want to understand how power actually works, subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss one.